SQOLOGY Podcast. Many thanks to ResoNix Sound Solutions for making this podcast a reality. There's a link in the show notes, but you can find out more about Resonix Sound Treatments, along with tons of other info, resources, and products at ResonixSoundSolutions.com. Now on with the show. Today I want to welcome Mike to the SQOLOGY Podcast. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Clifton. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. So I am going to go ahead and let you pronounce your last name because I will butcher it.
It's Buononato.
See, because you could say that and then I would repeat it and it would be wrong, and then we would go back and forth, and then so slap a horse it is.
There it is.
That's fine. So, Mike, I want to say majority of our run-ins has probably been at Steel Valley Regional.
They have.
Yeah. And honestly, I've until probably the past year or so, I haven't really. It's one of those things where you kind of popped up there. I kind of pop up there. I see your name go by. Things happen, and then that's been about it. So I don't think we've had a whole lot of direct communication over the years. But for several reasons, I'm always interested. In particular, I guess when people put on a larger scale event to get their feedback on that. So that's kind of when I reached out to Mike about getting on the podcast to kind of discuss the ups and downs of being on that side of the event, and also to get some more background on you because again, you seem to be a guy that's definitely had an influence in the community, but maybe not everybody knows a lot about. So I know you're into good food. I've seen that. But what's your background? What I guess let's start there. What's your professional career?
So professional career is a commercial culinary chef and food scientist. So I knew pretty much from a young age when I was just a kid that I loved cooking, but especially I love cooking for other people. Seeing them happy, seeing what the impact of my food could do. I don't know. It just always resonated big with me. And it was all kinds of things. It wasn't just like cookies and cakes. It was cooking dinner for mom and dad and all that. So I think I knew from a young age. Plus I grew up, I think I was maybe 10 minutes from the CIA, Culinary Institute of America, not the government agency. So I kind of knew that I wanted to go there as well. I mean, that campus is stunning. It's awe-inspiring. It was an old monastery that was converted into a cooking academy back in, I believe, the 60s. Wow. So it's just a stunning place to be, and I aspired to go there. So yeah, I always knew I wanted to do that from a young age, so that's exactly what I did. But I'll tell you, Clifton, I was maybe 2/3 of the way through the program, and I went for baking and pastry. Mm-hmm. And I knew then I was not a pastry chef, and I really did not want to be a baker. I was like, oh shit! Like I think I definitely made a pretty big mistake here. But I gutted it out.
What was it? I mean, what was the reasoning for that? What made you decide that wasn't for you?
So pastry chefs have a real fine hand. It's okay. They're into the details. You have to have very patient vision for where you're starting and where you're ending. Every detail matters. I think I learned in culinary school. I actually got voted best shoemaker, which in culinary terms mean you're better off at making shoes than you are cooking. But what it really means is you're a shortcut master. Mm. You're somebody who finds ways to get the end result done quicker. But that's not always best because you're not following true culinary practices and so on and so forth.
Working outside the box.
Yeah, and that really was where I was living. I didn't understand the need to take 2 hours to make soup. Right. It just seemed like no one was ever going to pay me for that.
It's in a can.
Yeah, I can expedite this pretty quickly. Like I don't need to be doing it this way. If I pressure cook the bones with the water and the spices, I'll be done in 30 minutes. Right. Like why would I go through all this? So I definitely was kind of sort of not really fitting into the program. And that's what kind of made me think like, all right, this might not be for me, but I got it out, finished it. And then on graduation day, I looked at a job posting board and there was a natural flavorings company that was looking for a baker to apply their flavorings into baked goods.
Okay.
So I thought, man, that sounds kind of interesting. Corporate world, 9 to 5 benefits, the whole thing, totally different, lots of science. I interviewed and I got that job position. And then that's been pretty much that's been the field that I've been in for 30 years now.
Wow.
So just by happenstance, one turn in college led me into this very strange, rare industry of people who get to create and formulate food that feeds tens of thousands of people a day.
That's fantastic. So is, and I'm probably generalizing somewhere here and probably way off base because I know nothing about it, but from my perspective, it sounds somewhat similar to what like Howard Cantor does, right?
So we're actually in the same field, and it took us until maybe 4 years ago to realize that.
Because I was like, man, this sounds really familiar.
Yeah. So he currently works for a seasonings company, which is similar to a flavoring company.
Right. To me, it's the same thing, but
Yeah, it is. It really is at the end of the day. I mean, he actually makes some flavorings as well. So,
right.
Yeah, we're in the same field. And really, it wasn't until a show at Nick Apicella's shop that we ran into each other. And Nick is like, you guys have to know each other. You're the only two dudes I've ever heard who do this kind of thing. Yeah. And we were like, no, we actually don't know each other in the field.
Right.
But then the second we started talking, we know everybody around us. Right. Yeah. It was strange that we never crossed paths, especially when you take in car audio.
Right. Yeah, it's a very small circle that you're in. The Venn diagram of that is extremely small.
Yes, and how we missed each other was extremely odd. I think it's mostly because the car audio side with me isn't until recent.
Right.
Whereas Howard obviously has been a player for quite some time.
Well, and he hasn't been super as active in that area as he was back in the day. So
no, true. Yeah, more so on the judging side. Yeah.
Right. Cool. Well, what got you into car audio?
So now we're going to go back again to high school.
Yeah.
My brother's best friend started a car stereo installation company when he was 16 years old.
Okay. Wow.
As an entrepreneur, his family had a little bit of money, but he was an extremely hard worker. Mm-hmm. And he went out, and I remember his first vehicle was a Nissan 300Z. The one, nice. And it wasn't the turbo, it was the one that had like the T-tops in it.
Right.
So I think it was like a 2+2, if I'm not mistaken. So that was the first time I ever saw that car. And that car still to this day is just a stunning shape to me. So he had a Z with a stereo system in it. And when I sat in and heard what a Nakamichi deck with Eclipse subwoofers and all that stuff going on, all the fun stuff, it was loud. It was clear, and when we're ripping up the highway with the tops off, it just sounded amazing to me. So I was hooked. I think I was 14 at the time. He was 16. He ended up doing that all the way through high school and through part-time in college. And I would occasionally jump back in and help him with installs. And he was doing more high-end stuff. He wasn't just doing like lower end deck installs on cheap cars. He was doing more high end vehicles back then, right. Porsches and things like that. So there was some fabrication involved, but that was back in the day with pretty much everything was passive crossovers.
Right.
If you had a 6.5 and like a 1-inch tweet, you were doing really well. Right. There was no such thing as a center, all that. It was more loud and clear, I think probably. But it was definitely had a fun factor to it. So I did that for a while. And then after culinary school and I started working, I actually got married very, very young and adopted my daughter when I was just 20 years old. So at that point, between graduating college, starting work, and having an instant family, car audio took a bit of a back seat. From that standpoint. Yeah. But I always did it for my own vehicles, more as just like a hobbyist.
Okay.
And I never left that part. Every vehicle I ever had would have at least something in it that was fun. Mm-hmm. Until I decided to go down this rabbit hole a few years ago, and that's a whole other story that I'm sure that we're going to get into.
So what got you, I guess, I mean, there's plenty of people who obviously have car audio systems or into car audio or were into car audio and that kind of thing. The transition of those people who then go into competition and then actually compete are obviously another very small segment again. What got you aware of competition in the first place and then got you interested in doing it?
So I'm trying to remember the inception of that thought process, and I don't remember specifically when,
right?
But I think it pretty much started happening with the advent of social media. Mm-hmm. When I started seeing some of the builds that were coming up, these ornate, and I have to split this up. There's two levels of builds that I've been exposed to in my lifetime because I'm a little bit older. There are those with motorized amp racks and neon and all that stuff from the 80s and 90s. There's that level, which was super impressive on its own. What I'm talking about now is more the integration within the factory look and feel of the cabin.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
With panels that, I mean, they just look like it came from factory, all that kind of stuff. And I think with the advent of like TikToks and Instagram and stuff, I started seeing some of the major guys out there who were doing some pretty impressive work product. And sure. I thought to myself, I don't have fabrication skills like that. I'm more of a behind the scenes guy, wiring, proper fusing, all that stuff. I take great pleasure in that, but not this exterior piece that's highly, highly visual. I want to start to learn about that and start to take a look at who's out there and what might be done for my vehicle. So I bought a vehicle a couple of years ago, started to interview a few. I had narrowed it down to that point to just a couple of folks who I think I would trust with my vehicle, and then went and started listening to their own personal cars just to see what their thought process was and how they went about it.
Sure.
And I landed on something. It really wasn't about competition. I think it was about the fabrication. I was more interested in how they fiberglass, how they laser cut, 3D print, all these new tech pieces that I don't have access to. Number one, I wasn't trained on. Number two, and the big piece to add to that would be any type of like a digital sound processing, tuning. Mm-hmm. And tuning being the black art that it is, that I was seeing that there was those who were highly adept, and it seemed most others were not. That definitely intrigued me as well too, because again, coming from passive crossover world, and now suddenly we have pretty much unlimited ability to control a speaker.
Right,
was fascinating to me, but also kind of daunting. Yeah. Because sometimes when you're given more tools, it doesn't exactly mean you're going to end up with a better house.
Right.
So
for sure.
Yeah.
So what vehicle did you land on, and who did you end up landing on doing the work?
So I had bought a Honda Passport, which was pretty new at that time. It had just come out, the little shortened Pilot.
Yeah.
And I thought this is a pretty cool little vehicle. Wasn't super expensive, wasn't super cheap. So I thought this is something good that I can experiment on. I don't know if I have the heart to kind of cut up a Porsche. I honestly don't. Yeah, I'm like, oh man, like if I have,
even if you could afford the Porsche, cutting it up is a whole other.
It's a whole other thing. Like if I have to put that panel back to stock and I have to buy it from the parts department, like that's going to make me cry.
Buying a whole other Porsche.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Honda's kind of on the cheaper side, so I think I can get away with it. Yeah. So I started to interview a few folks, and I had narrowed it down to two. And Nick, who I had mentioned before, was definitely one of them. I went down and saw him at his original shop in Stony Point. Mm-hmm. And it was him and Kevin at the time. Yep. And I got to listen to both of their vehicles, got a sense of the shop and all that good stuff. And then my final interview was with Matt Schaefer.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
And I went down to see Matt. He had me sit in a Porsche 911 GT something that was halfway through its build process. And I was definitely smitten. I mean, between the shop he has, the setup, it's extremely
his fabrication skills.
His fabrication skills are off the hook. I mean, extremely impressive. And this was all just pre-COVID, by the way. So this is 2019, like middle of 2019, like leading into that era is when we started talking. about the potential of doing something. So I landed on Matt, and I chose Matt because I really thought that the fabrication skills, again, which is something that I was leaning towards as being mostly impressed by, that's what I wanted to see. So we kind of mapped out a plan over the next couple months before I was going to drop off the car in March of 2020. And we had pretty big goals. It was, I was jumping right from not being in the industry to jumping into Matt Schaefer with like Focal Utopias and full amplifiers and like Moscone DSPs. I figured, man, if I'm doing this, I'm going all in. So that's exactly what I did. And we mapped everything out. And then COVID dropped in March of 2020, like right as I was dropping the car off to get the build. Oh. And I think that was it was a bit of a setback for us because his shop had lost, quite a bit of work, obviously during that time because nobody could be out and all that stuff. And I remember speaking with him, and he asked if it would be okay if the rest of the crew was able to kind of help out on the build. If you know anything about Matt, he has a shop within a shop.
Right.
So he has his shop, but it functions inside of a much larger space that does all kinds of other types of installs.
Yeah, it's kind of like the mad scientist inside what might also get tires and suspension kits,
lift kits, and where they're doing Jeeps and all kinds of stuff. And I said yes because I figured, I don't want anybody, not being able to work and suffering and all that kind of stuff. So I said yes. Right. So when I got the vehicle back after, I don't know, let's say 6 weeks or something like that, it wasn't exactly what I had thought it was going to be.
Right.
And it wasn't a direct reflection on Matt. I had said yes to other people being involved. I think the unfortunate thing is they were pretty heavily involved, and it wasn't as much Matt as it was them.
Yeah. Not as much of the oversight that you thought would probably happen.
No. And then I'm a stickler for details, and I started picking apart things that I didn't care for.
Which
and
everybody loves.
Everyone loves that comment, right? And I would not want to be an installer for anyone else, that's for sure. It's certainly not my own self. I'm my own worst critic.
Right.
So that was my first journey into that little space, and it almost set me off to never come back because right from the beginning I said, if I was going to go this route and jump into this deep end, I wanted to take it to a competition. I had heard of competitions, but I had never been to one in my life. Mm-hmm. And I figured I want to take a Matt Schaefer design system with high-end equipment into a competition.
Yeah.
And I was getting pushback on that from the beginning, that's not what these systems are designed for. They're more designed for the customer, for the overall experience, for the fun.
I was going to say there's a rare factor there where a lot of the industry, especially the industry dealers, even if like Matt, are very well regarded when it comes to translating that to competition. There seems to be a secret knock that nobody quite has the password to back and forth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because in hindsight, Matt was right when speaking with me. You build these things. You would have to start differently and build a vehicle that is competition specific. And I'm seeing that now. Mm-hmm. Like if you're a Brian Mitchell or somebody like that, right from the beginning, you have different goals in mind for how this thing's going to, especially speaker placement alone. And those thought process go back even further to, I bought a Honda Passport. Maybe I wouldn't have bought a Passport had it, if I was thinking of a competition build. You probably wouldn't pick a Honda vehicle necessarily especially considering where the speakers were located and how everything rattles and all that good stuff. So
it's like buying a car and then taking it to performance shop and, wanting a street tune done to it, and then going to a drift off and wondering why you couldn't keep up.
It's like, so true. I mean, anybody who's ever
it's like, but you bought a front-wheel drive vehicle. How did you expect to go to a drift competition? Come on, man.
It's so true. I mean, it takes you a while to learn, I think, in life. I mean, all of us, I believe, are car guys. Even car audio guys are car guys at heart. We love seeing vehicles,
it's the crossover, yep.
I'm almost sure we've all done that thing where you buy a car because of price, convenience, it was a hand-me-down, whatever it is, and you spend more money modifying that to be what it will never be, as opposed to just going and getting a BMW 2 Series with a little turbo or something.
And sometimes it works out. Like sometimes, hey, the magic stars align and here you go. But then it's easy to think that you have a magic touch then when really you just, luck.
Oh, you're like 1 out of 1,000. I know.
Right.
It's great. And I guess, I think the same is true really with car audio. And I kind of learned that a little bit with the Passport on that build. As it turned out, it wasn't that painful of a lesson in the end. My sister-in-law ended up needing a vehicle. She had her heart set on a Passport. It was really difficult to get them at this point. I think we're now in 21 or something like that. It was hard to get a Honda Passport. So I was ready to try something else that maybe was a little bit more car audio purposefully built from the OEM side.
Right.
So I stripped the Passport of its pieces, put it back to stock, and sold it to her and kind of moved on with my life, and then started to look for, well, what is that next vehicle for me? And that's where I found the Volvo S90 with the Bowers and Wilkins system from stock. And when the
reason for that was for the locations, or
all of it. Everything I had read about the Bowers and Wilkins system is that it's probably in the top 5 of all of the OEMs that have ever come out with any type of system, no matter what the price was. And there was something about the collaboration between Bowers and Wilkins, JBL, D-Rack, Unison was involved in the tuning of the vehicle, and getting it so that you could actually have both a driver-focused tune as well as, like, I guess we would call it like a 2-seat tune. They call it an all-seat tune.
Right.
That actually worked. And it had a super wide soundstage with a pretty good center. It was just pretty balanced overall, and the locations were excellent. They weren't ideal, but they were excellent. Mm-hmm. And it was a great starting point. And I thought, this is what I want. And being a mid-scale luxury type vehicle, it had a little bit more sound deadening. It had like the double laminated glass and all that other stuff that kind of comes with it.
You can't add to something
exactly.
else.
Yeah, you really can't change that. So I found one certified pre-owned with the Bauer system, scooped that up, and then mapped out a new plan. At this time, I was going with Nick. Okay. Because what I found in the meantime was where I had spent a lot of money on fabrication before, maybe what's more me and things that I'm after is when you sit in a car and you don't even realize anything's ever been done to it. Mm-hmm. I am definitely an OEM look guy. If I cannot see a sub box, I don't want to see a sub box. I want everything hidden. You would hardly ever know. And Nick's good with that, and he's also a very good tuner. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was a weakness of my previous system as well, that I needed to address. And if you were and I needed a good tuner to be able to work with this system. It had, I forgot, I think it's 19 speakers and all this craziness. And I needed somebody who could help me with that and really adapt to that. So that was the plan at that point, was to get the Volvo, modify it within that OEM mod, pretty much that category of not going too crazy, utilizing stock locations for everything, but sound deadening the hell out of it, tuning it wonderfully, and getting it to punch well above its weight. That's stuff that I just love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what we did. And that's really what led me into the very first competition. Was after we finished it, it was Nick's show. He happened to have a show at his shop.
And when was this? What year?
Oh, it's good. I think it was 21.
Okay.
Yeah. So now we're in 21. It was probably May, I'm going to say May of 21, something like that. I remember Doug Dobson came out to judge.
Yeah.
And just before they were about to start cutting up on my car, I entered the Volvo into Nick's show bone stock.
Okay.
Because I wanted a baseline.
Yeah.
And I figured, let me pay. I've got judges. I got Steve Wagner here. I got Doug Dobson. I got some people that I want to meet anyway. Sure. Howard was there. Let me have them sit in the car and tell me pros, cons, what things I should look for and this and that. And I kid you not. I think I finished dead last that day, as I should, mind you, like dead last. But that was the first time I got to sit in a bunch of people's cars and hear what I was really going for.
Sure.
And that was Ron Baker in the Audi. That was, why is the name escaping me now? Neon, the green Neon.
Oh,
Come on. It'll come to me later. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful guy. Sat in there, listened to his car, and I started to get a feel for, this is where I should be.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're trying to shoot for. And it's magical. It had that captivating thing where you never want to leave your car.
Winter
like
day.
That. Yeah, that kind of sound. It's tremendous. So that was the hook. That was the hook at that first show. And then I kind of knew what I was ultimately trying to strive for.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So what did you had mentioned that you're using focal components and everything with the Passport build. What did you end up going with as far as equipment wise on the Volvo after going through, I guess, that iteration of kind of knowing what you wanted and didn't want after you had the build done on the Passport?
So a little something about myself is that when I'm done with something from a project standpoint wise, I tend to move on in completeness. So when I sold the
wholesale
Passport,
move,
yes, I sold everything out.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start clean because I remember being an installer when people would bring me a box of parts.
Here's my box of crap.
Yes. I hated it, man. It was the worst. It's like, I don't know if this thing's broken, if it's been stored right, what happened to it. Like, I didn't want to do that to Nick, Kevin, and Matt at that time who had joined on with the crew. So I was like, no, I'm going to start clean. We're going to clean slate this. It's the right way to do it. It's a different vehicle entirely anyway.
Yep.
So I had sold everything off from before. I mean, everything. So we decided on Helix for DSP, because obviously if you know Nick, it's going to be a Helix. And we started in that arena and then walked up to Blam Signature Multix speakers up front. And center channel. So all tweeters, mids, and woofers were Blam Signature. The subs were Ravens. Mm-hmm. And we were going to power everything through a V12 and a P1.
Oh, wow.
Real simple. Just two 12s in the back in these little boxes that were pretty small. I think one cubic each for the 12s. And they were meant to get in and out of the vehicle very, very quickly. Matt actually designed it. It was a super cool setup. The amplifiers were all hidden behind the trunk liner in the sidewall area. Mm-hmm. All of the speakers went into factory locations. You could hardly tell that they were there. The conductor for the Helix was in like a little spot by the cup holders. Again, it could be totally covered. You would hardly recognize it was there. And that's where I went to my first SVR. We finished that car. So I competed at a show in May, stock. We wrapped up the car 3 days before SVR. So that's late July of 21. We all drove to West Virginia that year, competed, and definitely learned a lot there. That was not like show up and win, right? That was show up and lose. And
show up and learn.
Yeah, show up and learn is what that was. And I was warned, like, look, you're not just going to roll up into this thing and learn. And boy, what a learning experience that is. I mean, SVR being my first official show with a modified vehicle probably was stupid in hindsight because this is the best of the best across the nation.
Right.
I didn't even know how to have my music ready so that when a judge shows up, I'm the one who's like prepared for them, not the other way around. How to seat them, all the little details that people take for granted. And it was at that show, Clifton, I'm telling you, it was right then and there that I realized I had been wanting this for so long. And here I am, and I'm so unprepared for this. That
it's hard to get somebody prepared until they go through the experience, right?
Until they fail, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, thankfully, I met some judges who are, I mean, absolute troopers, from Keith Turner to Jeff Smith these guys who are so patient with me at that first show, lending me music, helping me out. seeing that I was struggling and that I cared. It wasn't because I was being lackadaisical. It's because I just didn't know.
Right.
They really helped me through it. But it was at that show that I really kind of decided I don't want this to happen to anyone else, because I could see that at this point I had heard rumblings that the attendance within the car audio, well, the SQ car audio community was not as large as it once was. And seeing the difficulty of attending a show like this and being a good participant in a show, which means being ready and staged and all that stuff, it wasn't the easiest process. So that's really, I think, where the seed was planted for me, that if I was ever going to do a future show or be a part of it or in any way, shape, or form with it, I wanted to make sure that no one else had that experience, that they were over-prepared, or I was going to have backups for them, and also so that the judges wouldn't have to suffer.
Right.
Because they definitely do not have time, in all reality, to be assisting everybody. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was it. So that was a heck of a first show. I'm super appreciative to all at that show, but it really did teach me quite a bit. Yeah, it was humbling. Yeah.
So how many SVRs have you done now?
3 total.
Okay.
This year would have been 4. I just decided to kind of step back on it. My vehicle selection and things that I'm going to do, I'm like, I think it's time for me to kind of take a step back. I want to reevaluate the Volvo at this point. It's gone through, as most of us do, every year is a different iteration.
Sure. Yep.
Where we address the weaknesses that we learned from the year prior. We're trying to constantly improve on the platform. I think I had taken it up to a point where the factory locations were doing what they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to compete further, I was going to have to start modifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm right at this precipice where it's like,
do
I start modifying now? My extended warranty is up soon. Like, do I want to just go get a newer one that I have a little bit more time on? It was just this moment that I was like, let me take a step back on this and reevaluate the vehicle and not waste the slot for someone else that can compete at SVR.
Right. Considering that you've obviously been to SVR several times now and competed in more than your share of shows as far as since that point of first going out, what would you say have been the high points over time of you competing since you got involved?
I have learned to really appreciate judge feedback. I don't know if I'm the only one who's in that camp, but I am a very intent listener, and I don't care who it is. There's value there, and I want to know everything because I'm a student of this. I'm gonna be a student of this for a long time. The more I know, the better I am. So when I have Linda stepping out of my car and giving me feedback about the quality of the violin in this one part of a track,
right,
I'm taking that seriously. And that is such a high point for me. Just recently, she actually evaluated my car a couple months ago and stepped out of it and had a lot of positive to say. And I've been working with her for years, trying to get details and the little fine points I think that we're all striving for to finally get, and I'm not all of them now, but the majority of them kind of rectified, where she was pretty pleased stepping out of the car. That's such a high point for me. It felt like wow, I'm finally like arriving at that. I'm understanding what I'm supposed to be listening for. Mm-hmm. That's a highlight. Other ones is, I think the more you're in the sport, the more you realize that the people in it are truly fantastic. There are some amazingly fantastic people in this. There almost has to be, right? This isn't a sport where if you're hosting an event or you're sponsoring an event or you're judging it, this is not about money. Like, you are not making money doing this. Right. You're doing it for the love and the passion of others who enjoy the sport and for the quality of sound. And when you start surrounding yourself with those people, the Cassie Halls and Richards, and the list is very long. You start to really appreciate the amount of time and energy, and they're still super positive and bubbly about everything. It's pretty awesome. It really is. Those are super high points for me.
Yeah, and it seems like, I guess like any niche thing, but being that we know about this niche thing, like the combination of the car audio competition side, sound quality car audio competition side, and if you put all the qualifiers there, tends to attract a very select group of people that tend to have very similar traits.
Yes.
So it's kind of like we all
carefully worded, but accurate.
We all get to nerd out for a bit for
yes.
for a few days, and then go back to normal life where people don't understand what we do. But it's the people that are involved, especially now. I mean, I know you mentioned how people started saying how the numbers were dropping from competition, and I've been hearing that since I started, and that was 25 years ago.
Oh wow!
But what's funny is like 2019-ish was probably the over the past 15, 20 years was the high point as far as numbers. Obviously COVID shifted that, but then, when we came back at Lone Star in 21, that was one of the biggest events for the past 20 years, that wasn't finals or anything. I think different formats, different events, there's some ebb and flow there because people choose to do one thing over another, or, finals used to be a bigger event than it is now, for example, so there's definitely been some shifting there. But I mean, I think, as far as the big events go, like SVR and Aggieland and stuff like that, I mean, we're full in no time. Like, we can't handle anymore. So I think the people who are interested in being there are there. We just need to see more of the right quality events in the right spot,
Well, that's exactly it. And I think, again, going back to that first SVR, that was the first seed of me thinking, I don't want to feel like this again, and nor would I want anyone else to have to feel like this in future years that have gone on since and through other shows. It started to dawn on me that, look, in order to have the bigger events, you do need some smaller ones. You need like you need a farm system, just like in baseball. We got to be, who are the next ones coming up? Who are the guys who are building their own systems in their backyard now? Like, how do we attract them? How do we start letting them have that experience that I was fortunate enough to have, where I got to listen to, by the way, Leonard Day's Green Neon, finally, Baker's Audi. How do we kind of get them involved too, to try to grow that so that the competition gets stiffer?
Right.
So like, I'm all with you. Like, yeah, let's sell out these shows quickly, but let's also get some new faces coming in. Like, let's kind of see what that's like too. And
right.
And then the only way to do that is you have to donate your time. I mean, it's almost like politics. Like, you can sit in the back and complain that others are not doing
all you want.
Yes. If you're not dipping your toe in the water and getting involved and being grassroots and organizing or supporting or helping judge or training or sponsoring or whatever it's going to take to kind of lift, then then to me, you really don't have much standing to complain or judge that of others.
Oh, I agree completely. And I think, and that's kind of the hard part with car audio, because there isn't really I guess finals to a certain degree, but there isn't really a, minor league and a major league, so it's one of those things where, and I've said from the beginning that, me personally, as far as events go, fortunately or unfortunately, I have very little personal desire on doing the development side of things when it comes to taking something from 0 to 80%. I'm not good at that. I'm a 80 to 110% kind of person. So having those fill-ins, and I think, right now, like ECA, WCA, that Richard and Linda and Cassie and Mike Myers and others are doing, I think those events are doing really well at pulling that side in. But, it's one of those things where for new competitors out there, I guess I'm throwing it out there, when you jump in, like with your experience, when you jump straight into an SVR or an Aguiland or something like that, you're probably going to fail and you're probably going to have some learning pains because that event isn't there to handhold you into it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But having those well-run smaller events with people who do have that experience and being able to ramp people in, I think Chris Pierce is a good example of that, where he has kind of come into the deep end very quickly, but he's also had a lot of relied on a lot of advice along the way to get there in a way that isn't completely overwhelming. So yeah, definitely ask questions of people and get, start getting prepared at the smaller events for the bigger events to where you don't have to get hit at the deep end.
Oh no, totally. And you really hit on something too, because in my daily job, I'm like you, I'm more interested in finishing something, not starting it necessarily. I mean, that's the nature of our work, is we're fine tuning something, and putting finishing touches, which is extremely difficult to do. Right. That last 10 yards to get into the end zone
takes all the work.
It takes all the work. The upfront stuff, I'm not trying to degrade that. It's no. Yeah, it's just a different. It doesn't interest me either. So it's funny though, because with HVR, which is an interesting segue into this topic. Yeah. Because it was out of my comfort zone, I thought I kind of wanted to see what it was like to have a minor and a major league event at the same time. Okay. And that meant from taking it from your 1 yard line to the other end zone, if I'm lucky, or at least get it close to kick a field goal or something like that to keep the analogy working. Yeah. But it was really, can we pull off having pros, veterans, guys who are completely used to high-end events in a mix with people who are at their first or second show? Mm-hmm. How does that work? And I know when I first started having conversations about this was the event that I was looking to do, there was definitely some eyes kind of staring at me like, why would you do that? Like, why would you set it up that way? And I'm like, because I thought in my mind it was a great way to get the new folks into a place where they're not just a spectator, but they are thrown into competition that has a support network built around it, but then they'd also have access to hear these other cars and to be in its presence. And to me, there's a difference between being a spectator and sitting in a car versus competing, and being ready for that. And I wanted them to feel some of that competition angst so that they were more prepared for future shows that they could get into and kind of give them a kick in the pants along the way. Sure. So that was the vision. Now that's not saying that's exactly what happened, but that was the goal.
The idea. Yeah.
That really was the central idea, was to make this not so much about trophies and another spot for a bunch of guys who just and girls who like really know what the heck
not about winning
doing.
And losing, but
yeah, it's not about winning and losing. It's really about bringing up, learning together, and having a good event for everyone. And that included a money round that was split. There's money round winnings for pros and money round winnings for amateurs. So it wasn't just, the amateurs were donating money to feed the pros who are going to beat them.
Okay. Yep.
So I figured if there's a way that we could kind of carve that up so everybody gets a little bit of something and there's still that kind of carrot to grasp towards.
What was your, and this is the first time hearing about this part, so I'm going to ask questions because I'm curious. So what was your definition breakup for pro and amateur?
Oh man, I'm going to mess this up. We did it by classification within IASCA, I believe. We ended up
so you just used their definition for it?
Yes, okay. Because it was getting too cloudy. Because as you know, because you've done a lot of these events.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Is policing that is very difficult.
So here's where the vision becomes the reality, and the reality is always a little bit sadder than what you have in your mind, right? HVR, again, 10,000 feet in the air, pros, amateurs, everything's wonderful, great food, and we all go home happy. Mm-hmm. Then reality sets in. How do you divide pros and amateurs? But before you could even do that, how do you know who's going to show up?
Right.
And that's a problem with hosting a show that I under forecast right off the bat. And I know if you speak to Angie Landis or anyone else who has hosted a show recently, who's jumped off the springboard into this pool, that's the biggest hurt. Is people don't usually sign up or show up until the day before or day of. So
that's why I start a year in advance.
Yes, but when you're starting a year in advance for a show that is known,
it's a completely different. Yeah, you
completely different, right? Because people want to make sure that they get in on that because they know
the wheel's already rolling. So yeah.
I mean, Uncle Larry is known. Everybody wants to be a part of that, right? And I respect that. And actually, HVR is partially his, I feel, because I did reach out to Larry and ask him a million questions and my naming construct and all those things to make sure that he was on board with everything.
Right.
So yeah, that was the biggest problem is before I could even contemplate how to divide a professional competitor and an amateur competitor, I didn't even know who was going to show. Because if you get 25 people and 23 of them are pro, well, so your vision's gone.
Right.
So, and you don't know. I remember thinking, we're going to sell this thing out in 2 weeks. And then the reality sets in and it's 2 days before the event. And we hardly have enough people to make the advertised money round amount.
Right.
Which, by the way, another footnote of learning. Do not advertise the amount of money round
before you know what you have to deal with.
Yes, before you know how many people are going to show up, because I'm a stickler for details. And if I tell somebody this is what the winning pool is,
right,
I'm obligated to it. Yes. So that was a little bit of a learning curve there as well.
Sure. That's one of the reasons I've actually kind of pulled away from having the money attached to the event at all, because that way, and also I feel like then when it's attached, when the money's attached to the event, I feel like then people feel it's an obligation versus, it's like somebody along the way here is basically donating that money because I'm sure, as you found out, the entry fees barely cover the cost of just doing the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Something's getting volunteered somewhere in there to make this all work. And I prefer, personally, as far as the event itself goes, keeping it as much by the competitors, for the competitors as possible to where there aren't other influences as far as, well, I gave X amount of money to this event, so this is what I want to see happen. Like, no, that's not what, that's not what it's there for. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. And that's where I try to caution people, especially if they're doing their own event, especially when money is attached, like keep the money out of the conversation when it comes to signing people up. And then if you have the money there at the end, or, if you'll always have the money there, regardless, it doesn't matter. Just keep that a minimal part of the conversation because that's not what it's about. And I don't find that people come or don't come based on that. You know what I mean? It's a nice incentive to put out there. It's a nice whatever. But I mean, if it's a well-run show with the right people involved, and people have the right expectations of what they're going to get just for showing up, similarly, kind of like how you broke up the money, what I did at the show in Georgia a few years back, it's been not running now since 2020. But anyway, the idea there was the whole event basically had one trophy. If you won the whole thing, grand champion, cool. Here you go, your trophy. But there was basically nothing else. There was no money. There was no awards. It was purely about feedback. Come in and learn. And I mean that show sold out faster than any of them.
Oh wow!
And it wasn't that much cheaper. It was just the fact that people. But we had when you showed up, you weren't thinking about what orgs you were in or whatever else. You just it was a set amount. You show up and you were getting. I mean, every single one of the events had anywhere from 10 to 14 judges going through your car in a weekend, and without the emphasis on who won. the judges were able to be open with feedback verbally afterward. I mean, score sheets were open. Like, it was just one of those things where, hey, let's learn together, and there was times even we had, to your point, as far as like, getting people ready. There was a couple years where we had 3, very well qualified people like Steve Head and a couple other guys, pre-judging the cars before they came in to judge. So they would go through, listen to the cars, give feedback. And if the competitor wanted to open up the laptop and make some adjustments, go for it. Like, it was one of those things where before they got judged, they almost got, like I said, prejudged to a certain degree to make sure it was as far as they thought they could get it before there, make sure there's no hiccups, make sure everything's playing, make sure everything's in phase, all those things where there's no excuses. You came in and roll it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, knowing what that makeup of customers, yes, but competitors is, coming in and then knowing how you're going to break out, especially when you have money involved like that and everything else, man, that's a lot. It
is a lot, it's funny that you just mentioned the last part, because that was one of the things that I thought would be a great add into like an HVR was, okay, once we do decide who a pro and an amateur is, I think the amateurs should have an opportunity prior to being judged that, exactly as you said, they get an expert or somebody who at least has been there, done that, to sit in the car and just give it that 5 to 10 minute quick listen to say, hey, you might want to adjust this, and this before a judge comes by. So we even set up the schedule to be sure to put amateurs later so that they had a chance to have other people listen to their setups so they could get the best possible opportunity and learning from that. Just more added benefits, right? Because I mean, these things aren't cheap, as you said, they're not cheap for people to enter.
Right.
They're not even really covering the cost of the event, but they're still not cheap.
Right.
And we want them to have value for that, because
100%.
That becomes the biggest rub with starting an SVR-like show, is if it doesn't have a name yet and it doesn't have a sought-after attendance, but you're trying to do it bigger and larger than those local events that are charging $40 or something like that for somebody just to show up and get a quick judge, and then you chip in for some food, and it's just real low-key, real easy. So you're not that, but you're not all the way SVR, but you're somewhere closer to SVR than the other. That buy-in is steep. Because these guys are used to lower. So we were sensitive to that, again, from an amateur standpoint of what's the draw going to be? Because if they're going to spend this much money, the value proposition, like what are they getting out of it? And I thought at least having that opportunity to get kind of like a little bit of a testing session done before they were judged was one way.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
I thought food for sure was another. Yeah, like and the setting itself, the setting itself where it was held is more like kind of an expansive park that's on top of a mountain. It's got tremendous views. It's just a beautiful place that has other things going for it. There's like outside jungle gyms, and there's a river if you enjoy fishing, and all this other kind of stuff that's around.
Right.
There was things to go, so maybe your family could come along and enjoy the day with you type setting, right? So I'm like, how many other aspects, can we kind of work into this where there are benefits for pros too, but mostly for the newer folks kind of coming up, to give a little bit of something for everybody to kind of create a little bit of energy and draw. And I'm hoping that now that 1 year is down, that by year 2, there's been enough of a kind of like a postmortem on it, that it went well enough to warrant people wanting to come back for a second go, where we'll only be able to fine tune it and kind of make it better.
So what do you think of those things that you threw at it? What do you think worked the best?
I did like that we were able to get a pretty good mix. I think we had about 25 competitors show, and it was a pretty good split, honestly, between pros and amateurs. So that side of the mission was a win. Some of the folks we saw on the amateur side, I saw a few weeks later up in Maine, where I was judging for Mask at an event up there. I got to see them again, so it was nice to see those faces now becoming like a recurring competition, and even more so that they had made significant improvements after HVR, leading to Maine. So that doesn't always happen, especially this isn't the cheapest sport to be in.
Right.
And they dedicated time, energy, and money and made changes within I think it was only 2 weeks. And they were up there doing that. So that side of it, I think, was a win. Fail points of HVR. I love brutal honesty. So fail points of HVR. Underestimated food audience. I should have known better. I advertised the food. I told them I was doing like high-end skirt steak bowls with like chimichurri sauce and pickled red onion and all this cool stuff that I like to do, right? I wanted food to be a high point. I had enough food for all of the competitors and extra. I'm Italian in nature, even though I look Scottish, and I know how to cook for a family, right?
Right.
So what I underestimated was the amount of spectators who rolled up. And I wasn't paying that close attention to how many people were circulating the event that were not registered there. Sure. So when it came time for lunch and I'm busy cooking and doing all my stuff as like a little one-man show, we got wiped out. I mean, wiped out, right? I think we had over 50 spectators. Oof. So 25 competitors with sometimes spouses and girlfriends right. And other things. And now you throw in 50 spectators with kids and family and all that good stuff. And it was very hard to keep up with. So in the future, we're going to have to do that differently. Like we're going to have to think about that a little bit differently for sure. We handled the outdoors well. So one of the amazing parts about being in an outdoor park is that it's beautiful. One of the negatives is that it can get hot.
Sure.
And you're pretty much in the bright sun. Some folks were smart and brought pop-up shelters. It's not enough, right?
Were you judging in place or?
Yeah, so that's a good point. We made a pivot kind of last second, and I'm pretty proud of the pivot. Another thing that comes up with an outdoor park is you don't exactly have access to a whole lot of power for people to plug in. Right. So I had a portable generator that was pretty quiet, pretty powerful too, that should be able to run up to 5 cars easily. So I brought that along, and what we did is we created kind of like a center lane. It's a pretty big parking lot up there. So we created a staging lane for everybody to kind of enter into, all back to back to back. And we had power wires strung out there off the generator that people could actually hook up to. The negative is that they weren't undercover.
Right.
So having those vehicles undercover for next year is going to be a priority. We're going to make sure that the tent company comes out there and sets it up so that staging lane is a covered area.
Okay.
Just honestly, just keeping sun off it is going to make a world of difference. Those cars get real hot, and it's not fun to judge a hot car and all that stuff. So that was a little bit of a setback. Nothing huge. It's a super easy fix. Steve Wagner had a great idea. Said, well, if you're going to go through the trouble of having a tent company set it up for the staging area, also have them offer a rental for those of us who just want like a 10 by 10 on the side to be covered up too, where we could pay a little extra to rent that tent. And then we don't have to set it up. We don't have to take it down. We don't have to do any of that. It's just there for us, which was smart. So
it may or may not be cheaper just to buy a 10 by 10.
True.
But
they're not that expensive, but then again,
I was gonna say it depends. But the tent company, and it depends on the area too. I just know going through tent company rentals quite a bit, like the Lone Star event. I mean, we had over $20,000 into tents there.
Yeah, I'm not that bad. Like I remember looking into this originally. I think a 40 by 20 tent setup was like $1,200 rented to put it up, take it down for the whole day. That whole thing. No, it's pretty reasonable. And I mean, it was another added expense, and not knowing how many people were going to show up for HVR, I defaulted to say no. Plus, it could have been cloudy, and it would have been wonderful. So, but in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, we probably should have that just as like a break in case of emergency thing moving forward. So yeah, the sun was a little hot. That was one. The food ran out a little too quick. So I want to make sure that's on point for next year. And we had some snafus towards the end when we were going to award the money round. Money round, we could probably spend an hour on talking about the pitfalls of money round. We've already spent a little bit on it. It's very difficult to pull off. And here we are trying to do it split amongst pros and amateurs and awarding it to top 5 in each. And then there was another added wrinkle where we have to eliminate those who, like myself, who's running the show. Like I can't win in the money round of my own show. Right. And we had sponsors at that show who shouldn't win at the money round either, or should they? It was a debate point.
Why? I mean, I'm just asking.
I don't know why. To me, I kind of go both ways and I see both sides. I had a event planner working with me on this event. And, this being my first show, I wasn't leaning one way or the other. I saw the positives of both sides of a sponsor being able to win versus not being able to win. And the decision was made that they shouldn't be able to win. That if they're sponsors, people could call like collusion and they shouldn't be able to win on like an event that they're sponsoring. I could see positives and negatives to that. So I kind of just defaulted to, okay, that's fine. But then upon the award ceremony, an honest mistake was made and one of the sponsors won and received funds while another sponsor didn't receive any funds and ended up finishing tops of the entire event. So it was a bit of a miss. And that was one of the
because
unfortunate...
of the inconsistency?
Yeah. Because it's an honest mistake, but you know this crowd, right? If there's a mistake that happens in SQ competition,
everybody will find it.
Everybody's going to find it. Everybody, I think Mick Wallace said this perfectly yesterday on Facebook. Somebody posted about SVR saying, hey, look, this is a group of hardworking people who are going to do the best they can. Please be patient. Please say positive things and all that kind of stuff. And then Mick's like, I'm not worried about the day of. I'm worried about the Facebook warriors the next day.
Oh, for sure.
Who are
3 days later. Yeah, that's
3 days later.
Yeah, that's when I delete Facebook off my phone for a week after.
Yeah, and he's dead right because that's what happened. HVR,
and it's usually the people who weren't there who just heard secondhand the complaints from certain people, and then took all those various bits of facts, turn them into a story of fact, and then that out there, and then it's like, wait, well, and this is where the truth warriors get tough, because it's like, well, is what you're saying, all the pieces of what you're saying are factually correct? Yes, I can't say that it's not
That's
true.
Right.
At the same time, the way it's being presented is not true.
It's so true, and it was disheartening for me because I'm not a huge like social media presence. Right. So,
then you're like, man, I didn't go into this to screw everybody up.
No, and I tell you, I think it was like a week later, somebody said, "Hey, you should check out this." Some post on some social media chat site or something like that, and I'm reading into it, and I'm like, wow. If I was reading this, I would think the only thing I know about HVR is that they screwed up. They awarded somebody money that shouldn't have won, and that event sounds like a fail. Right. And I'm like,
especially when that's the only thing that comes out. Yeah. Yeah.
That's literally the only thing that people are talking about, because that news is more interesting.
Oh, for sure. And nobody wants to know something that went well. They want
no. I mean, other than people did comment about the food being good.
Right.
Everything
selling
else.
Food. I mean, at the end of the day,
I'm not selling food. That's right. It was this like kind of negative connotation. And I think when you and I first spoke about doing this podcast, I'm still a little bit on the fence about whether or not I even wanted to do HVR again. And that was because of that. I have noticed, and I feel bad about this, but those of us that really go out of our way to do as much as we can right. And I don't know if there's ever been a perfect event, right? Maybe there has, but yeah. But something's probably going to go wrong, and something did go wrong at ours, but we corrected it immediately. The next day, that money was given to the proper competitor who should have won that spot. Announcements were made that said all that. It wasn't swept under the rug. It wasn't hidden. But to have that be the lasting image of what came out of that show was it's tough, because you work your butt off to make it valuable for everyone.
Right.
And I know people found value in it and had a great time. And to have that be the takeaway is a little bit deflating for the amount of work and money and energy and love that goes into something like that.
I understand completely. Well, and nobody, I mean, I think the hard part here is that things get presented very black and white, and it's, nobody's going into any of this with the intentions of failing or hurting anybody or overlooking something or taking advantage of somebody, but I guess what is, as a result of all that, is there a resulting idea in your mind of how you, because it's obviously it's going to come up again at some point, but I mean, how you divide out now that that's, well, I guess I'm unclear on one point. What was the final decision on this? Were sponsors pulled out of it? Were they added back into it? What happened there?
So sponsors, so before awards were given, sponsors were supposed to be pulled out of it. So myself and two others who were sponsors of HVR were not supposed to be in the money round winnings.
Right.
One of us by accident made it through and won. It was immediately noted upon handing this individual the actual money at the very end of the show. He literally looked at me. He's like, "Are you sure about this? Like, this doesn't, I don't think this is right." And so again, there's no intent. It was literally an error. We're exhausted. It's the end of the day. I don't think, again, we're awarding
numbers at that point, not paying attention.
We're literally calling out numbers, man. And I honestly forgot myself that so-and-so should not have been handed that money. I'm just trying to get everybody wrapped up and out. Plus, I've got I have an end time, and I'm sure Larry's got the same. There's a certain amount of time you're allowed to be in the venue.
Sure.
And then you need to be out of the venue.
Right.
And I was creeping up where I had about, I think, 45 minutes left before I had to be completely packed up and off the site before they inspect it. Mm-hmm. And it was getting dark and all that. And I just let's wrap this up. Yeah. Right. So that was really a big part of it. So yes, they were supposed to be out of it. One slipped through and was in it. It was corrected the next day. Moving forward, this is a good topic of conversation, because if you put a gun to my head and I was leaning one way, I think sponsors should be able to win. But
and I agree. I mean, I guess my thing, my thing with, again, outward observation, and you and I haven't talked about any of this in any kind of detail until right now. So just so everybody knows, this isn't, this isn't another conspiracy. We literally we're discussing this in real time as we go right now. So, but from outward perspective of what I saw, because I mean, like you said, that this is how a lot of people kind of found out about the event, which, I mean, I guess it worked for press to a certain degree. I mean, hey, but
it's true.
Yeah, everybody knows what HVR is now. But, my thing was well, if somebody can't win something, then why were they entered into it? So was the concept,
and why did they pay the fee and
right, or why did somebody accept the fee? I mean,
yep.
And maybe that's and I mean, I'm sure you have an idea of how I do things. I'm not sitting here to reference to how I do things as anything. I'm just saying my brain works where I proactively, invoice. Is somebody, I have a conversation with somebody, they want to do the event, I invoice them. When they pay for the invoice, they're in the event. All that is a proactive movements on everybody's part to participate. If you just have a link on a website and somebody is signing up, then you have less control over that process. But also at that point, if somebody was signing up, as long as it wasn't and I have had it happen before where somebody registered for an event, they couldn't make it, and then they didn't really follow through on communicating that the way they should with me, and then somebody else popped in to take their spot, and then it's like, well, wait a minute.
You're not supposed to do that.
Right. But, I mean, I guess my point there is that, I mean, there are ways for people to creep in that you maybe wouldn't have, for lack of a better word, allowed to compete. But at the same time, again, working from the backside of the event, somebody had to still schedule that person. Somebody still had to see that person going through competition. Somebody still had to register, tally, input the scores, total the score. Like, there's a whole lot of checks and balances through here that seem to have been missed if going into it, the proactive thought was that they don't compete.
So that's the safety net, right? I think you're hitting on something that never made sense to my mathematical mind. Was if you accept, I don't even the money part aside of like the entry fee.
Yeah, but the car was competed, obviously.
Yes, the car was judged. It was scored.
Right.
If it wasn't flagged and pulled out immediately, where it was just you got the scoring for sake of for your next competition, because there are certainly some sponsors who obviously compete and want to know how to improve, and this was an opportunity for them to have quality judges go through their vehicle.
Sure.
You would have to have a pretty set system that never would have had them included. Correct. That score sheet would have been pulled aside immediately. Immediately. And that's dangerous. That's still dangerous. Right. It would have been easier just to.
But still, especially with the money round, where how many judges did you
have? 3.
Yeah. So you had multiple judges going through the car. I mean, I don't know.
It's a lot.
To me, that, to back off of the scenario, because obviously I wasn't involved directly, so I can't judge on what happened there. But, from a standpoint of the way I look at things from an event standpoint, especially with, invitational style event where you have multiple judges, in particular an event like, the bigger events like Aggieland or SVR where you have 6, a minimum of 6 judges going through a car. One, the bias of an individual judge with an individual competitor is virtually non-existent. The affected outcome of that is virtually non-existent. The amount of sway that they would have to put on the score sheet
would be black
difference. Yeah, when it comes to, again, going back to your mathematical mind that you're talking, by the time the scoring is done, the amount of effort that somebody would have to go through to sway the outcome, especially of a mid-level car, because most of the time we're talking about mid-level cars. I think this was a probably more of a significant event because the person actually won. And that's the other part that hits a red flag for me is like, would this have ever become an issue if the person was mid-pack?
Oh, probably not.
Right.
Yeah, probably not. But, since we're getting into this, and I'm in the interest of clarity, to muddy the waters even more, which is which is going to paint the picture of. This is why I think you have to make a more definitive decision up front before the event even starts to take place.
Right.
Is leading into the 2 weeks before the event. Remember now, the attendance was pretty light. And it wasn't.
So you're trying to dig up whatever you can, wherever you can.
Yes. So we're trying to make sure that there's butts and seats. And we've got cars there for the 5 judges we have coming up to do this and all that. Like there's a lot of money, time, everything to be put out there for 12 cars to show up, right?
Exactly.
So in my mind, there was a couple of things that were done in the background that made it so that I believe one of these people slipped through the cracks and ended winning in the money round. And this is how that happened. Is
some compromise taken up front.
There was a scenario whereby the entry fee for one of the sponsors was actually paid by myself because I owed them money for something else anyway.
I got
and they told me, you know what, instead of just paying me the, whatever, the couple $100,
just wash it.
Yep. Yeah, just wash it and put it through the system like that. So then again, to your point, if you have an online registration system, and here I am booking I paid for myself. Even though I'm doing the show, I paid for myself to be in the show, right? Which is kind of stupid, but why not? And then I paid for a sponsor because I owed the money anyway. So now if you're doing it online, the registration system just sees a registration with a vehicle attached to it, right, and that it came off my credit card, but that's about it.
Right. So nobody was thinking that through, yeah.
No. So it ends up kind of muddying it even further. And that's not an excuse on either part, but it is a lesson learned.
It makes more sense, yeah.
Yeah, it makes more sense. So, and I found that this is pretty much the case, that I've watched a lot of the bigger shows that have had a little bit of a riffraff that have happened afterwards, when people are kind of crying out collusion, or that there was this like mistake that was intentional, or this and that, or it was personal. It's not. It's not. It's an honest mistake that probably happened for a couple different reasons that stacked up that allowed it to take place, but none of them were meant to be harmful or incendiary or in any way. They were really just to try to make the event pull off.
Oh yeah, to make it happen at all for everybody.
Yeah, just to make it happen at all. Like that's how we chose to do it. It's almost like if we could open up our books and show you the loss of money that happens to do shows of this, you would not think that anybody would ever do this to be incendiary or to be collusive. It's not worth it. It's not worth the time and energy. We have better things to do with our life. It's just an honest mistake that we correct. And then the next time we do it, we make improvements so it doesn't happen again. And then we'll do something else wrong, but then we'll fix that too.
But on the point, and again, I've put up a wall between, as much as possible, between myself and sponsor money, as well as, between myself and the money going out, just because I want to be able to make decisions that are as clear as possible without that over your head. That said, I think, the majority of people that I have worked with who have sponsored events, I would just say all of them understand that is a necessary wall, and because they put money into something doesn't mean they deserve something in return.
Mm-hmm.
So totally I would say that even if people think that that's somehow happening, the fact that thought process happened at the event level, frustrates me a little bit, because I think that unnecessarily degrades the integrity of the people who are typically involved in these things unnecessarily. That shouldn't have, to me, it has zero bearing on the outcome, mm-hmm. And mainly because as soon as, having years of experience as a judge, and also from the scoring standpoint, and also from the event director standpoint, it's one of those things where when you're judging car to car, you really could care less whose car you're in and what's going on. You just are focused on the score sheet, listening to what's in front of you, and getting onto the next car. It's, mm-hmm. You're eating the elephant at that point, taking bite after bite. You're not, you're unconcerned about what's happening. And from, the event director standpoint, I've said multiple times, but I could barely remember who won the last show, nor do I care. It's like, congratulations, here's whatever you got, and, on to the next one. My biggest thing is I just want to make sure that those results were achieved as accurately as possible. You know what I mean? But it's one of those things where when it comes down to those things, the idea that, at the biggest events, we're still mostly talking about three figures here being flown around, guys. Like it's like I promise you that any one of the people's involved integrity and the time that they've been in this industry and the time that they plan to be in this industry there's not enough money in any of this for anybody to bend their integrity for anything. Like, it's just not worth it. And I mean, that's why we deal with known entities when it comes to these people that are going on, and the people who are, sponsoring things. They know up front that this is, a gift. Call it charity, call it whatever you want. I mean, I'm sorry, but there's not a lot of return on investment for the brands who are involved here. They're doing it because it was part of who they are. They want to support the community. They might use it as bragging rights, sure. But I think the amount of people that would actually, especially now, maybe it was different 30 years ago. I think it was different 30 years ago, especially with certain people. But I mean, I think now, winning, yeah, it's a big deal, but it's not that big a deal.
Totally agreed. It's funny because there's two things here that I think probably need to be said. And I am proud of the fact that our judges did a wonderful job. There was no issues with scoring per se, but 2 points of clarity about HVR and what came out of it, especially with what happened after HVR, is the sponsors involved with HVR were not monetary sponsors. They were time and energy sponsors. So we weren't even talking about money being transacted to support the show. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of important to note. Really, what we're talking about is just the registration fee that Money Round was inclusive of, because this wasn't an a la carte show where you got to pick the orgs or the Money Round or this. It was a one size fits all. You get everything for this one set fee. So because they paid that fee, but that was it. That was their monetary expense. So that being aside.
Yeah, but if I pay that fee, then I compete.
Now you have access to that.
I should be able to win. Period.
So I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that now. I probably should have been sooner. The bigger issue I think at hand, and why if you go to patient zero on this entire issue, is when you find what was at the center of it all that made it get bigger. It had really nothing to do with the money or the winnings being paid out. It was not about, to your point, the 3 figures that were involved here. Mm-hmm. It was the status of it all. It was if I'm a sponsor of a show and if I end up with the top rated vehicle in the entire show, and that's not called out at the show, I'm not part of the winning, which, as we have already discussed, should have been done prior, but we had elected not to. But then someone else who is a sponsor does win, then that individual or that sponsorship company, if they the next day are receiving notifications from other people being like, wow, what the heck happened to your car? It didn't even place.
Right.
Now that's their livelihood. Right. That is their business. That is how they earn. And I am respective of that. And that's where it's like, so yes, an honest mistake can be an honest mistake and it can be corrected, but there are ramifications that come from that mistake that I'm aware of.
100%.
And am sensitive towards. Now, I thought we had it tied up and in the bag within 24 hours because I was all over it, trying to get it rectified. But yeah, it could spiral. I mean, it can spiral outside of the audience that I thought I had it within. And to your point, yes, it goes out. Once it hits people who weren't even there, and then they start adding the 2 cents, it blows up into something it was never intended to be. But I think at its core, it was not ever about money. It was about the notoriety of the win.
Oh, for sure. Well, and yeah, and if you again, if I enter something and compete in it, I should obviously
be able to win it.
I should be able to win it. Yeah. And I mean.
So while we're on that topic, I'm just curious. I kind of want to throw this out there because I'm still feeling this one out. It's still a little raw. Is if you're a competitor in this and you see a sponsor, like a pretty big name, I would imagine, at the show, and then they end up winning in a money round, that doesn't bother you, right?
Not at all. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't bother me either.
And I mean, I feel like maybe you were better set up for that than most events, being that you had it broken down between pro and amateur.
That's what I'm thinking too. Yeah.
like
I know.
You were already a leg up from the rest of us on that.
I was already being sensitive to it.
Yeah. I mean, again, everybody involved in this knows. I mean, you have, SVR, you have Arc Audio as lead sponsor. You have Brian Mitchell and several lead Arc Audio people both judging and competing, like,
and doing well.
Yeah. And again, that's a big part of that is because of the way the system is set up. It's meant to be durable to that. And so from a perceptual standpoint, yes, I understand how perceptually maybe that could be. But again, if we go down the road of perceptions and coulda, wouldas, nobody would be doing anything. Because if we eliminate all bias, if we eliminate all that perceptual issue, you're left with incompetence, because the people who are most competent in this are the ones who are in the industry doing these things, and the people who are willing to put money into it to support it, to garner new people to build the machine to do the thing that we do, are also the most competent at doing it. So,
and that's the rub, right? If we cut them out and
cut the system,
you really don't have a system in place, and then everything falls onto the organizer or onto like the competitors to just fund the heck out of it.
Fees that somebody shows, go for
That's the point. If you guys want no one to win who has anything to do with helping out a show, then you're right. It's going to be $600 entry fees. No one's going to enter. We could barely get people to enter as it was. And
again, I think
out of control.
You're doing everybody, not you specifically. It's one of those things where you end up doing a disservice to the people when you overcritically, look at all those different things, because again, you end up cutting the people who are most competent from being involved, and then when you also, it's messy at that point. I'm sure there's cleaner ways to do it, but we're not going to get Budweiser money. You know what I mean? Like, and if you're going to have an event with sponsors in that regard, that's again that's from I guess my only quote unquote advice in that would be what I've come to over the years. Like with SVR, I handle the logistics of the event. Larry handles the hosting and the sponsors. Other than what Larry posts on Facebook that we all see, I have no idea who's involved sponsor-wise. I don't know how much money they've given. I don't know where the money got. I don't care.
It doesn't even matter to you.
Right. My part of, judge selection, the scoring, the who's competes, who doesn't, how, what, all of those decisions I make. And if that affects something on the sponsor side, sorry, so be it. Don't care, and I don't hear about it. There's a wall there. Aggieland is very, Aggieland is very similar, where I handle all the registrations. I handle the invites, who's there, who's not, who the judges are, how it's carried out, everything else. Chris Pate pays the money, and and handles the barbecue, and hosts the place to be there. So it's one of those things where he doesn't have to worry about the logistics of the event. If his shop guy wins, so be it. He had nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
But it's one of those things where, again, when you have somebody that involved with some, and I think Chris and Aggieland is another great example of where having that wall of separation and things logistically is very important, but also very, very functional a need to be, because of the vehicles that we had, we had 46 cars competing at Aggieland, and probably he probably built 12 of them, and plus Jeffrey, who was also competing, who's also host of the event, who works at MTI, probably tuned 16 of them, 18 of them. So it's one of those things where if you were to go down that rabbit hole, it's like, well, sorry, Texans can't come to the biggest Texas event because of this successful shop who's doing what competition was built to do in the first place. Like competition was, I mean, I think we've gotten down this road, this, and I don't mean to degrade it in any way, but down this Dyma road of, competition in a good way has become very much more DIY now than it used to be. The whole competition in the first place was there to be a marketing agent for shops to sell builds.
Yeah.
And now, it's one of those things where you have, very specific shops that even want to deal with competition. It's, and there's a huge wall between competition and the brands. At this point, in my opinion, the dealers and shops and brands who are involved in competition are on our team. Like they're just another, it's like, and they get it. They've been in the same place we are. They understand it. So, they want to be treated fairly, just like we do. But there shouldn't be this us versus them thing, in my opinion, because they, unlike the DIYer coming in, they have a circulating cash flow that is, there is some potential return on investment for them from competing and throwing money at it. If, Clifton Keplinger or Mike or somebody else comes in and we throw our money at it, we're just throwing money at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. There's no side benefit.
Right. And even that, people question that. I mean, people question Richard and Linda, who have no other, there was a time, 10 years ago where there was a huge amount of scrutiny about what their intentions were in the industry. And they work for NASA, and they have nothing to do with financially from as far as, their actual income or whatever. I mean, they'd probably be much better if they weren't involved in car audio at all. But the amount of time and effort and everything else that they put into it, just because they love it like we do. Like if we all sit here scrutinizing everybody else's, motives for things or possible motives for things, and then if we ourselves, as event directors, start scrutinizing those things voluntarily.
Yeah.
I guess, that was my biggest rub that came from it was, well, why is that being scrutinized? The fact that a sponsor, if the sponsor was there and the sponsor entered the show and you accepted them into the show and you judged them in the show and you scored them in the show, then they have the right to win the show. And like I said, in my opinion, if they had come in mid-pack, it would never come up as a question. They would, thanks for your money, goodbye. Mm-hmm. The fact that they won is what brought in the afterthought of the scrutiny, which should have been thought out going into it, but also should have just been chalked up to, again, I don't see why it would ever have, it shouldn't be an issue in my opinion. If it is an issue, then you're putting more question into, you're questioning the integrity of the event and the judges more than the visuals of a sponsor also competing.
Yep. No, totally agreed. Yeah. So I know that this is your podcast and you're interviewing me, but I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
That was interesting to me. You made the decision, I'm assuming it was you who made the decision, possibly Larry, that SVR was going to do things a little bit differently this year. And I'm intrigued by that for HVR for future years. Mm-hmm. And that's the orgs collect and manage their own side of SVR. Mm-hmm. And you're managing essentially money round, and Larry's handling sponsors. So there's a different division of labor there. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that that's pretty new for this year. It seems to be, at least.
Yeah, that was my decision, and that we did that wholesale with Aggieland and SVR.
Oh, both. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is why and how did it work at Aggieland? Because I think it sounds on paper to me to be the right way to do it.
So, and again, this is probably, the reasoning and the outcome and all of this is probably more unique to my position and these particular events and those kinds of things than it is for the typical
smaller
show.
Events. Yeah.
I'm not saying I still, regardless, I still kind of think it's the right way because it leaves the onus on. So to back up a little bit, I mean, SQOLOGY started out to be a thread to kind of bring things together. At the time, this is back 2015, 2016. It was more regional. You essentially had two competition groups. You had MECA and IASCA. And it kind of depended on region and who the event director is on whether you're competing MECA or IASCA. But then, we also had a weaving up and down of having finals being, unified with the two together.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot more small, local, regional style events back then. So, I mean, back then I was doing 12, 14 events a year.
Oh, wow.
Aggieland and SVR were kind of the highlights of those because, as SQOLOGY was first involved getting SVR back up and going when it came back. And then SQOLOGY had also taken over Aggieland at that point when Chris wanted to basically stop doing it. So we had those from the beginning along with all the smaller events. But this, day to 3 days after the event of Facebook warrioring happened a lot where you had events. There was a lot of MECA bad versus IASCA bad type of thing, and people trying to vote with their, entries on whoever they were going to support at the time. So from the beginning, SQOLOGY was very much like the way you did HVR, where if you and it was only, for all the local regional events, it was only orgs. It was so there wasn't a money round component to those shows. So there was no third party judging. So from the beginning, it was pretty much if you enter, you're doing IASCA and MECA, however much, $60 or whatever, you're doing both, you're getting judged by both. And that's just the way it is. It also made things easier from a logistics standpoint of if I'm going to have two judges there, I'm going to maximize those two judges.
Yeah.
And, you're going to get, if you don't like MECA, don't care. You don't have to get membership. You don't have to go to finals. But you've now had the feedback of that judge. And my biggest, I did certificates for awards. I didn't do anything for awards or anything else. One, because, there was a lot of times where I was flying in to do these events. I wasn't driving there to be able to take a loaded trophy somewhere. And, two, I was putting all the fun, I was covering my own travel essentially up front. And then everything from entry fees and whatever else I could muster went into getting the best judges I could there. So, Keith Turner was a big part of that. Jeff Smith was a big part of that. Tom Myers was a big part of that. There was a lot of well-qualified people that, were kind of following me around doing these events. And it kind of became known that, if you came to an SQOLOGY event, if I was involved, you were supporting everybody. It didn't matter. I didn't care if you didn't like somebody or not. But as a result, by 2019, in that few years between when we started in 2019 and, before kind of COVID disrupted things, but in those few years, we went from 40 people at finals to 90 people at finals.
Oh, wow.
And, a whole lot more competing in both IASCA and MECA because with us doing these local events everywhere and doing both, everybody was qualified.
Yeah.
And if they were going to MECA finals and IASCA was there and they were already qualified, they went, yeah, sign me up. So, it raised all boats. Shortly after that, with the COVID disruption, which really didn't affect us too much, but Iasca sold to another owner, which Travis was involved throughout, but it was still a transition. Mecca sold to another owner. There was very little, in the way of loyalty there in the past. I had brought in the meantime, like around 2018, I brought Emma in mainly as a safeguard, just so, because at the time there was a lot of talk of people wanting to use Emma kind of as a sword against Iasca or Mecca or whoever they didn't like at the time, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I kind of brought it in and bought the affiliate to safeguard it. And then, everything with the orgs kind of collapsed to a certain degree after COVID in terms of support and communication and everything else. Mm-hmm. And then when things kind of fell apart with Mecca, between the new owners and then Richard and Linda exiting Mecca and basically everybody that I'd known exiting Mecca. I mean, it's one of those things where me and Steve Stern and along with Vinny and guys like Chuck Music and Mark Eldridge and Scott Bawalda and others, all I was the one who put pen to paper to write the first Mecca SQL rules back in 2001 or 2000. And so my I met my wife in Mecca. I had known Steve Stern used to live up the street from me. Like, my over half my life has been revolving around this, and then the whole machine kind of went, and it was gone.
Oh wow!
So the problem came is that with as much as SQOLOGY was integral with the orgs, when all those relationships personally for me fell apart for the most part, and also simultaneously I wasn't able to do the travel and I didn't really have the incentive or desire to do kind of local level events anymore. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those things where I've been weaving in and out of SVR over time. Obviously I wasn't involved for a few years. I was involved here, there. This is the first year that I've really been involved with SVR to this level. And then Aggieland, of course, I've been there pretty much all along. But the problem came with as vocal as I've been over the years about supporting the orgs, when I then eliminate an org from being involved in the competition, then I'm now viewed as the gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you become almost personally liable for it.
Right. So then, that success or failure, and a lot of that is my own fault, because over the years, I've done everything I can to prop up the orgs together to keep, before Lone Star in 2000 or 2021, I guess. There was a big potential falling out with Mecca. There was issues with one of the judges, everything else. I did like a 4.5 hour live podcast with the person in question. We went from a whole lot of people, because it was one of those things, we had 72, 73 competitors there. And I mean, if you were going there and you were doing the event, you're like everywhere else, I was forcing you to do everything that was there. So you were doing Mecca, you were doing Iasca, you were doing Emma. And when you have a large segment of people saying, well, I don't want to be judged by Mecca because of XYZ, that fell on me to go, okay, well, I have to fix this in order for the event to be a success.
Yeah.
So we fixed it. Mecca was there. The right people were there. Everybody was fine. We got through it. But again, it was one of those things where it kind of started getting to the point where, I don't have, and now you have so much. You got Emma, you got Mecca, you got Iasca, you got MASQ, you got ECA, WCA, it's,
No, it's a lot.
There's so many people to try to appease there. And it's like, I don't want to, I was at the point of between, all or none was my,
philosophy.
Yeah. And I didn't know where to break it down in between all that. And I also didn't really know what I wanted until I was, I was in Mexico doing the money round there last December. And, we had 40 something cars and 6 judges, I think, from the U.S. All judges that, we'd all worked together plenty of times. And, I was in my typical role of, scorekeeper and everything else. But at that particular event, it was only money round. There was no orgs at all. It was just money round. And I realized how much I loved that part of it and how much the orgs were just a accessory to that in for what I wanted to do and for what I enjoyed and for what I felt was the core potential of these big events.
Got it.
And so I was in Mexico when, Aggieland was an easy decision because I don't really have to ask anybody on that. I just made the decision on Aggieland. But on SVR, I called Larry while I was in Mexico and was like, this is, we got separated. I only want to do money round. And then it came up, on the way back from Mexico, I was having discussions with Howard and Iasca and everybody else on, kind of how to make this work. Because the problem is that, with Aggieland SVR, we collected all the entry fees for the orgs, we paid the judges, we paid their, travel and expenses and everything else, and along with the sanctioning fees for the organizations. But that was still revenue coming in for the event that now we were Xing off.
Yeah, that's right.
So, that's where kind of it was like, well, let's do this pre-register. And the other part of it was because I have such a wheel of organization on everything. I wanted who all's there, who's doing what, how it's going to be managed scheduling wise, all those kinds of things. So I still wanted an imprint on it to know what was happening. So that's where I was like, well, just pre-register with me and then pay the orgs the core of the fee, which has been its own headache, which I'm not doing again. Just because it's too confusing for everybody. But at the time, it was one of those things where I didn't know, really what else to do to kind of keep everything together. But yeah, it's for me at this point now, it's pretty much, hey, if the orgs want to be involved, that door is open. I'm not looking to, financially win or lose from that proposition. I'm there for the money round and nothing else. I'm still integrating Emma into that only because I do have control over that, only because I've been involved with that. Everything else, like I have packaging over that. The other part of it, like with Iasca and Mecca, I don't know who the judges are anymore. I don't know, I used to be able to select my judges who I wanted and say, this is who I'm using for Iasca, this is who I'm using for Mecca. They want control over how all it's happening, how the trophies are happening, everything else. Like everybody wants their thing. So it's like, okay, then you do your thing.
Yeah, totally.
I'm bringing a platform here with 40 to 48 cars guaranteed. So it's up to you to do your thing. If you do well, you'll do great. If not, so be it. But that's where the evolution is. And Larry was kind of at the same point, I think. And his might be for different reasons, just because I haven't competed for years personally. So, and I do that on purpose because I have competed, but I don't compete seriously myself. One, I'm not a good competitor. Two, I don't want that to cloud my thoughts because, this judge, I think this judge gave me a bad score or this or what, it's one of those things where, and Larry's still competing. So I think, he might still get, uptight if he feels things are happening away in an org. The other problem is that I just can't keep up with everybody's rules and explaining to people and telling them what class they're in and all that. And as soon as I think the biggest to get to the crux of everything here to really answer your question, what it comes down to is if I'm taking somebody's money, I immediately feel an obligation to fulfill that, like what you alluded to earlier or said earlier, to give them value on that proposition.
Yeah.
Whether I'm making money or not off of it, it is irrelevant to them. They gave me the money.
So this is, I think, a pretty important point that, I could be totally off base on, but being an event host now, the thing that was a little bit mystifying to me was the sheer number of organizations that are out there now. To your point, if there was one or two previously, that's something that you could integrate into an event. when you start talking 6+,
Right.
It doesn't work because they all cost money. And as an event host, again, if you're unsure of how many people are even going to show up at your event,
Yeah.
being at the level that HVR was at, and then we were specifically getting folks who were asking for us, is Mecca going to be at the show? Is so-and-so going to be at the show?
Right.
And I remember asking Larry about this maybe February of this year. I'm like, what do I do? Because I have so many people asking me for, of course, one-offs. I have 6 people. They want 6 different orgs.
Right.
He's like, you have to just pick because you have to pay all these organizations to have that. And so this is what's interesting to me, and I can't quite figure out how this works. So I'm just going to float this out there because I don't know if anybody else knows this either. Is if you say, I want Iasca, I want Emma, I want Maska, like I want all these people to show up. Well, you as the event host, you're paying sanctioning fees for that. You're paying the judges for that. You're paying the judges travel for that. You're, in most cases, providing the awards for that, the everything. Yep. So I'm left wondering, what is the org actually doing? Besides collecting the sanctioning fee and running in the opposite direction, I wasn't, there are a few who do a lot more than that. I shouldn't say that. But it felt like, as the event host, 90% of the work and financial responsibility was on you.
Director. Yeah. Well, and that was the hard part for me in the transition because back in the day, I was kind of okay with that personally because I also had the freedom to move within that structure. So, it was one of those things where, like with Mecca, I posted the results on the Mecca in the Mecca database. Like,
oh wow.
The only reason Mecca knew that there was an event going on was when I sent them a flyer sent them a list at the beginning of the year, what dates I was having events, and the information that went along with that. And then when I sent a PayPal with the entry fees after the day after the event, like that was the two. Yeah, other than
that was the only
they didn't have to touch a thing. They didn't have to, they weren't. I handled all the communication with the judges. I handled all getting them there. Again, the only thing they knew was that there was an event that day. They put it on the calendar, and that they got the entry fees, and that was the communication. And I'm not knocking that, but at the same time, like at this point, when I kind of really solidified that I only want to do the invitationals, that I only want to do multiple judge events. I only that's that level and have that micro level of control over things where like SVR, the score sheet that's coming this weekend is a totally new score sheet.
yeah.
But I like that freedom to be able to do that, to be able to be hey, we're changing all the rules, and to be able to continually do that, because again, it's an iteration, it's an iterative process. It's one of those things where none of this stuff is like new under the sun. It's 20 years of development times however many people are involved that are doing it, and not be tied down by, we can't do that because this is how they're going to be judged at finals or whatever else. I look at every single event as its own thing. There's no, it's a silo for me. Once going into the event, we're doing it this way, and when we leave the event, that's the end of the event, and now we go on to the next one. Like there's no, there's not connecting the dots for me in terms of how things are done that way. So when it came to the orgs, what you're saying as a value proposition isn't far off, because they have finals, but and that's really kind of why people want that involved, or because they have a personal connection to the people involved, they want to support that or whatever. But I guess that has also been kind of my push, and again why I kind of have tried to push to lead the front on this, because I happen to have the two, I happen to be in control of the two events that can be there with or without the orgs.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So I can push that boundary a little bit more than most probably can.
Yeah.
And it's not a threat by any means, shape, or form. It's just the fact that, hey, if you're XYZ org, I can say with a sure, all you have to do is show up and you will make your money. Like, all you have to do is show up and do your thing. I just don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that, because I think that my whole point was, I think competitors, not all, but there's a good group of, like you said, mid-scale competitors, maybe newer folk, stuff like that, ones who haven't been doing this for a long period of time. And I would include myself in that, who thought, well, why wouldn't you just have all the orgs there?
Right.
Well, the reason why is because it costs a lot of money, and they're not supporting that. They're not sponsors. And I think that's
even
not
if you are
known.
making money on it, the amount of work that goes into that is enormous.
No, you have to do all the legwork, all of it. And there really isn't much. Now, some are easier than others and all that. I'm not trying to say all orgs are the same. But from a competitor's viewpoint, I think many of them view it like they're essentially sponsors of the show, and it's easy to add.
Right.
No.
You're like, well, and again, I think that's the hard part where I was at, where when I said no to it became where if I said no to a certain organization, I was somehow, leading their destiny.
Purposeful.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
being
so,
purposely.
Yeah. So like I'm being vengeful with that.
Vengeful.
Yeah. With by not, if I don't support, and let's face it, this all started revolving because of the Mecca ordeal. And that's black and white, and I've said it all. It's not like I'm hiding anything there.
Mm-hmm.
But I sit down with them and we discuss it and everything else. And I mean, it's one of those things where there's definitely that level where they're going, why don't we have that? Why aren't we in control of this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, because it's an event. The event itself is the thing. It's
not you.
Right. And certain, the thing is, like, in my opinion now, with the amount of orgs there are, the competitors really aren't even keeping up with all the orgs. When they come to a big event like this, the orgs are like a multiplier when you're playing a slot machine.
Mm-hmm.
So, you come in, you pull the handle, and that's your invitational round. And then, you hit the by 4 multiplier to do, Ayaska, Mecca, Mask, and Emma. And then you have extra chances at trophies, basically. Mm-hmm. You might also get points towards finals if you need those, who knows. But it's interesting because, and it's probably because people are so accustomed to me forcing everybody to play with everybody there. So, last year, I think was the first year where I gave the option for people to do what they wanted as far as, orgs go. And then this year I'm straight up, what do you want to do? Do you want to do anything? I don't care. And it's interesting how, you had a few people that were kind of like, everything but Mecca, or, Ayaska and Mask, or Emma and Mask, or whatever, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the majority of the people who did everything before just said, just enter me whatever's there. Like, just sign me up.
Yeah. Because
and then they ask questions later, like, oh, did I pay for this? Oh, what am I signed up for? Like, who do I pay for what? Like,
it's definitely me. Yeah.
So, it's like, yeah, I just if I'm, and the thing is, I think as event promoters, I mean, obviously there has to be a value quotient. Obviously we're doing this for, as close to reasonable value as we can and everything else to where we can scrape by and still, do what's needed. But, when you figure the amount of money that is going into many of these people competing, the entry fees are nothing when it comes to that, even and finals might be a little exception where you're running into $1,000 entry fees, but for SVR or Aggieland or any of those where we're talking $500 probably in entry fees. When you figure that a lot of these people are traveling from California, from Mexico, from Canada, from the Northeast, from Florida, like getting there one way. Just in fuel and, let's say 1 or 2 nights in hotel room is more than those entry fees.
Yeah. Yep.
and nobody is going there expecting, there's a few people who probably expect it, but it's a few. Like the money round is not, going, oh, there's $3,000 on the line. Oh, well, I'll compete now, and I wasn't going to before. I would say that 98% of the people are not saying that. So yeah.
I would agree. I think that's kind of a learning too. It's even the term money round itself,
which I've stopped using, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think that already has a negative connotation that needs to change. And that's something that we'll do different for next year as well. I mean, other than certainly not posting the amount again. Right. That was just ludicrous.
But I've gone to SQ Invitational and, yes. Cash prizes. And then,
yes.
If that cash prize ends up being $50, it's $50.
$50. And it's still better than you thought coming in.
Better than nothing, yeah.
I know. Yeah, because definitely in hindsight, that was mistake one of many. But no, I think, yeah, it was a great learning experience. I mean, we certainly had setbacks, but the learning curve, kind of like the first SVR, was just as steep. Learning about the cost of having an organization there, learning about how much a judge gets paid for the day, which I think people would be stunned to hear. It is pennies. Right. It's absolutely nothing. And when I first heard that, I rallied against that and said, absolutely not. I'm doubling that daily rate because that's not right. That's asinine. I wouldn't want to show up at a place.
The judges are volunteering, and
they're essentially volunteering.
Yeah.
I mean, so anybody who thinks differently, like,
or they're many times they're paying to be there, and many times the judges are paying to be there.
Yeah, and because even like the expenses, like we got guys who are using miles to get airline tickets, and like they're using their own essential personal finances, and they're getting like $100.
Right.
Like, come on.
Right.
Like that was a definitely a learning that I think needs to change. We all need to kind of kick in for them a little bit more. I mean, if we could do,
or give them give the judge tips. It doesn't bother me at all.
Yes, something, man. Seriously, like,
We always joke about the 20s and 100s and the CD player, but hey, it's time to start throwing them out there.
Maybe. I mean, if we can give them like aircon inside the vehicle so that they're more comfortable, I mean, that's nice too.
Something, right? Or at least don't question their integrity after the event and then bitch about them. Because
that's what I'm talking about. I mean, now that I've been on the other side of it,
I think most judges are fine with. I mean, I know in the years that I've judged and everything, and I mean, even now, like even doing this with the event directing, I mean, this is mostly volunteer work on my end. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like SVR. I mean, the funds get turned over to Larry and the competitors in terms of what's paid out in the money round and stuff like that. But as far as it's not. I'm not getting paid, X amount to do any of this, nor am I, taking from the entry fees or anything else. Like all that just gets turned. But it's one of those things where the judges love what they're doing just as much for the most part,
Agreed.
Otherwise they wouldn't be here. Or at least the judges I work with purposefully are, I know that they would be there regardless. They want to be there. They want to be involved. But yeah, there's nothing, I mean, you could give a judge $5,000 for working a weekend, and then you post on Facebook 3 days later questioning the results of the event in some way, shape, or form without going through the process to understand what happened, and you just demoralize them 1,000%. Yes, and everybody who's involved, because again, nobody's going into this. At least anybody I know. I mean, nobody's going into this purposefully to mess up and, take advantage of everybody or do the, whatever. And that did happen back in the day. I mean, 100%, there was money going around that made it worth to do it. Now, no, it's not worth it.
There's no money. No, no. I mean, really,
there's not enough incentive to cheat.
I think that's my point overall. Anyone who thinks that there is that collusion or there's that thought process, that individual wouldn't be there in the first place. They had to leave their family, leave time, travel all that way. They're not doing it for the money. Yeah. They're definitely doing it for better reasons than that.
Well, and the side part of that is, the people on the competitor side, because I've been, in the past, I have been involved with the, brand teams and everything else. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because then as soon as, and I've seen both sides of this where, if you're the brand team that isn't pushing, their team out there and building and having a stack of competitors and everything else, then, you're seeing is just giving up and you're just not involved. But then if you go out there, you go out there with 15, 20 competitors and you have everybody on stack and you're sweeping classes left and right, then everybody's like, oh, they're cheating. Oh, they're colluding with IASCA, this or that or whatever. I've been, literally been there on both sides of that. And it's like, if you do your job really, really well, you get, accused. If you just give up and don't bother with it, you get accused. Like, you can't win. You're not going to win. Just put the naysayers to the side and do your thing and enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. I mean, I think to that, to that point too, I mean, I wondered what it was like to be a judge. Mm-hmm. So when an opportunity came up a few months ago to do training in mask and to become a certified judge, I jumped on it. Because I'm like, first of all, I want to know how that all works better. I want to understand the life of a judge and how that happens, but also how to score a proper sounding vehicle. So just for my own personal use, I thought that would be interesting to know.
Sure.
So caught a quick training. It was fantastic. Went up, did my first event back in June. And actually on my birthday, it was my birthday that day. And I did that event. And let me tell you, that is no joke. It is extremely difficult to do. There's a lot of things you're listening for. There's a lot of things you're scoring against. It's hot. It's stuffy. Vehicles I'm not exactly the smallest man for anybody that knows me. So shoehorning myself into a mid 80s Toyota MR2 and things like that to kind of listen.
And it's not like you're getting to sit down and demo a car for fun. Like
no.
Demoing, listening to demo or demoing your own car and judging a vehicle accurately car to car and to the score sheet is a completely different experience.
It was, and it's funny because to think, and again, it's my first event. So, I mean, maybe this is different for others, but to think that I even had the opportunity to think of how I could score that car lower or how I could do this or how I could do that. It doesn't even approach your mindset.
The brain power.
You don't have the brain power to process it because there's so much else going on that you're trying to do. Yeah. We weren't even tallying the scores at the end of the score sheets until the end of the day, purposely to not say, oh, well, this car scored this, therefore the next car should score.
That's exactly why I keep the score. We do the scoring the way it is, where it's all broken up.
Yep.
It goes straight from judge to, being mathematically tallied. Then I retally it. And then I'm the only person, having nothing to do with any other part of it. I'm the only person that actually even has access to the outcome. And I don't even push go on the outcome until everything's in. So yeah, I mean, nobody, including myself, knows where the show is going until the end of the show.
And that's so crucial, I think, for people to know. I mean, anybody who's listening in who thinks that, judges are there to tabulate individual scores on things from dynamics and tonality and stage and all the other difficult things to ascertain that they've been trained to do. They're literally just scoring those things and then getting out of the vehicle. And then it's tabulated and away you go.
Especially when you figure there's 40 plus cars at the larger events like this, like you just don't have time to mess with it.
No, you don't have time to do that. You're dialed in, like you're focusing. You have your tracks. You know what you're looking for. You're just trying to execute on a high level. And
it's kind of like if you were to sit there and be playing classical music in a concert pianist scenario. And then also doing algebra on the side, like
yeah,
to be able to do those two. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of smart people involved. I just don't think any of the people, including Richard and Linda, who are the smartest people I know, like they're still not doing that. Like you're getting in there, you're doing your job, and you're moving on, man. Like
no, and the real funny part for me is I save my score sheets from all my events. And, I don't frame them or anything, but I do, I do keep them. Right. And I go back to kind of look at progress notes and stuff like that. And the consistency of judge scoring is very impressive to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're pretty consistent. Like if you haven't made changes and stuff, to see Richard and Linda and Keith Turner and all these guys like Harry, the list is pretty endless. If they're low, they're consistently low. That's how they score, and And once you, I think, kind of learn the pattern, and then appreciate how difficult the task is, you really, I think anything divisive is so far from my mindset now.
Right. Well, and that's part of the biggest goal for me is not necessarily that I don't care if judges are close to each other. In fact, if judges are too close to each other, I would wonder more because that's just not the nature of the beast. Like judge to judge on each car, there's going to be, room. I'm looking for consistency with the judge themselves on how they're scoring car to car,
Amen.
And the judges' scores themselves, again, when I'm my part of the job, I'm just sitting there putting in scores all day. So that's all I'm looking at. And I mean, there's even a signature to that in what the judges do. Like I can usually tell whose score sheet is whose based on what they are emphasizing on the score sheet. Because I mean, it's one of those things where nobody is listening. Nobody is able. You can't critically listen to a car and accurately score 100% all aspects of the vehicle in a given period of time. I mean, even if they're given an hour, you're still usually, again, with the bias and the experience and everything else that is put in. I mean, a judge should know about where this car is going to line up within the first 30 seconds. From there, it's applying where they're most critically listening. And pretty much every single judge that I've ever worked with has first they have a bias, whether they are more emphasizing, spatial or spectral. They might, somebody might be more caught up in the imaging, staging aspects of things, and somebody might be caught up more in tonality aspects. And almost everybody has their favorite between those two things if you ask them, Mm-hmm. And that's where the mix of judges becomes very important as well, as far as what the judge selection is, because you when I'm selecting 6 judges for an event, I'm looking at the best way to get a complete score sheet. One complete score sheet out of 6 judges.
I like that. I didn't even thought of that. I think my point from before is you hear people state that, I could have won this, that, or the other thing, or I could have placed higher had so-and-so scored
one judge,
me.
right.
Yeah, more in line with other judges.
That judge was scoring everybody in that regard. So they were never going to score you higher.
That's right. And that's how they score. So it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Instead, you say, I still need to get my scores up across all of those judges. Right. All of them can be improved. You didn't score 10 out of 10 in every single category. So as long as they're consistent from event to event, then you've kind of got your marker.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. This is a dynamic, difficult sport for sure. And I love it. And there's a lot to love.
And that's what, I think what keeps people coming back and why, more people show up for competitions than just simple meets. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like you definitely have your popular meets, but it always kind of, it seems like, but people always end up wanting a competition attached to it. You know what I mean? It's funny. But that's, and I think again, going back to what we discussed in the beginning, as far as having that very particular, this thing that we do attracts a very particular set of people. And, I think it's because of, and I've said this many times, but I'll reiterate here, it's because of the subjectivity that makes it interesting, that really makes sound quality competition what it is, not in spite of it. You know what I mean? Like if you were to make sound quality completely objective and remove all these aspects that we're talking about, it would be boring.
I mean, I would say probably 4 years ago, I would have thought that you could have bought your way to a first place trophy. Right. You could have showed up.
You go the right person.
Shot.
You spend enough money. And,
absolutely. Yeah. If I buy the best equipment that is available, and I have the best tuner and the best installer, and I spend X amount of dollars on doing all that, I can buy myself an instant win at any event that I go to.
Not going to happen.
And that is the furthest thing from the truth. And I think that's what those folks that keep coming back love the challenge of it. And there's so many of us. We got guys buying stuff off Parts Express that are punching up and taking first place, and other people over here who are using the finest speakers that are hand assembled, and it takes all
coming in
walks.
mid-pack. Yep.
Yeah, and we're all competing against this unknown challenge. I mean, it really is. If you like competition and if you thrive towards that endeavor, and people who are loyal and truly amazing to be around, I mean, it really is a unique space to be in, which I guess that's kind of the culmination of all this. I found an industry that is extremely unique, and there's only a handful of us that do it for my daily work life.
Right.
And then for my hobby life, it's more of the same. It's a hyper competitive yet fun loving group of people who are extremely passionate about sound, as I am about food.
Right.
And I don't know, it just all kind of comes together, and
for sure.
It's pretty amazing.
Well,
it's awesome to be part of.
To summarize 2 hours and 15 minutes, I say just stay off Facebook for the next week after SVR and everybody will be happy.
That pretty much is it. I know when we first started talking about actually doing this podcast, and again, I think I said this earlier about whether or not there would be another HVR and all that. I think enough time has passed and jets have cooled that I could say for certain there absolutely will be another one next year. It's as challenging as it is fun.
Yeah.
And it is kind of a neat thing to be attached to. And it was a lot of work to get it just up and running. I think it'd be too much to let it go over small things that went awry this year.
Agreed completely. And you were really you were robbed of your cherry popping there to a certain degree because I mean the biggest, it's one of those things where, you know, this time right now, days leading up to a big event like SVR is when I just want to throw everything in the wall and just say, I'm done, I'm over, you know, never doing this again, whatever else, just because it's just so much of a grind. But then, you know, Sunday afternoon comes and awards go out and everybody's, you know, go to dinner and everybody's happy and everything's fine. And I mean, that space right there makes it all worth it, you know? And yeah, there's a couple upset people, but you're able to talk through it, you know, whatever else, you know, at the event when it happens and it's all good. You had some unnecessary drama pop up at that point of time that should be the climax of all this work.
Yeah.
And then it was further double whammied afterward, you know, where it was made public. So, yeah, you're definitely, if you're of the mind to go back into it, I would never, you know, tell somebody, oh, you just need to do it again, because I know how much work's involved and I'm not going to, you know, tell anybody to do it. Like, if you want to do it, go for it. I'm not going to tell you to, but yeah, I mean, I think if you have that under your belt now to where you're able to, you know, kind of know some of those things. And obviously if I can do anything to help or anybody involved, you know, can do anything to help, we will. That's what we're here for. But, yeah, and not help, but, you know, support and lend an ear, or if you needed, you know, just sometimes just being able to have somebody safe that, you know, has enough experience to talk it through with, and just verbalizing with that person, you almost always come up with the answer without them saying anything. Like, they never even said anything yet. You're just like, oh, that's what I need to do.
I know. Yeah. You almost have to just like talk it out.
Exactly. With somebody who, you know, understands what you're talking about. But yeah, it's, I think the second go around, you'll be in a far different position to be able to get the good parts out of this that you were robbed from this time, just because of the circumstances. And I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're giving it another try, because we certainly, you know, the amount of people that are out there willing to do that part of it, as far as actually putting the event on, are obviously very few and far between. And it's, you know, it has its rewards, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't do it. But, you know, you got to get through that hurdle a couple times first. But I mean, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for this.
Yes,
this
sir.
was great.
Yes, sir. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take it easy, Clifton.
How about the ones we especially like? Which ones? You know, the ones with the cars that go, I hear you. Hit it.